lots of money being brought down. And I think in that sense, I'm surprised because there's not an absence of money in this sphere, both from legal means, but also illicit means. We did this study financed by the Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency, looking at really hardcore terrorism cases, but also who is surrounding these Salafi jihadist terrorist cases. And of course, Salafism, I'm not going to go into that in the absence of time, but we made a nice graph. You are the first to see this graph because it will appear in the EU Radicalization Awareness Network fact book on Islamic extremism. But it's really about the ideological dimensions. We can talk about that. Of course, the arrows should go both ways, so you can also become a purist or more inward-looking Salafi from having adopted more extreme versions. But what we found was really interesting. There were very strong social relations between different spheres. And here we found one picture of all the cast of characters that have been of interest for the security service and for law enforcement. And these key leadership figures are at the top of this Salafi ecosystem in a local way, but also on the national level. And 6 persons, 3 of those you see in the picture with those circles around them, are now been detained by the Swedish Security Service. These are the major figures. 4 of them are the major figures. 2 are related to some of these individuals. There's now a great battle trying to, they've taken decisions to expel them, but the 2 are stateless, some of them from Iraq, 1 from Egypt. It's going to be difficult to detain them. All of them have been released because there's no likelihood for them to be expelled. I'm going to show you 2 very busy slides of what the ecosystem looked like. I have many more from each city. So if I had another hour, Lorenzo, I'll come back. And for those of you who are really nerdy about the Swedish Salafi jihadi ecosystem, but here was the most serious person, Mohammed Mummo. And for those of you working in US government, you will be very familiar with him. Huge repertoire, but he's been linked, it's a very small community, but he's been linked to many of the different cases. Usama Qasir, he's sitting in prison here in the United States, helped Abu Hamza al-Masri. They were all interlinked in what was known as the Brandbergen mosque environment. One person you'll see here is Farid El, otherwise known as Abu Omar, and he was a friend of Mohammed Mummo. That's his connections to different spheres. All of you are CT specialists. I'm not going to need to explain maybe some of them. David Headley he was linked to. He was also linked to the 4 Swedes who went to attack Jyllands-Posten in Denmark. He was also linked to Mohammed Belkaid. I think today is the anniversary of the Paris attacks. Well, that gentleman there under the Knights there is one of 2 Swedes who participated in the attack in both Paris and Brussels. We also discovered when we mapped out this environment that we had transnational Dawah organizations based from Germany, active in Sweden. You know, we have freedom of religion. There is nothing wrong with distribution of the Quran. It's important to emphasize that. But the important thing was who is behind, standing, delivering these Qurans. Well, most of those individuals were participating in Salafi jihadism spheres. And we even had the founder Abu Nagi of Divai Religion, which is a transnational Dawah organization active in a number of different countries, even to South America. And they were banned by the German authorities. Why? Because 140 German FDFs had been active in the German version of these. In Swedish, it's LAS. In UK, it's called READ. in this environment. And more significantly, this network was funded from Sweden using the Swedish Foundation for some of its activity. I think the authorities are trying to readdress that issue. It's not easy. We also saw that they developed institutional platforms, schools. Some of those 6 people that we have, or the security service have detained and are to be expelled because they're foreign nationals and a security threat, they were running schools, a network of schools, which they got state funding from, because we have that system. But also they were very active in trying to have an expansion drive to other cities. Now, that expansion drive has been stopped, but there was a huge ambition to try to use that as a platform to insulate and to indoctrinate youth that were part of this Salafi jihadi ecosystem. Financing, I already talked about the financial crimes, but we also have a lot of charities, money going out of Sweden to different areas, and what agency controls that. But more significant, also money coming in from certain Gulf states that come with a huge bag of money and may impose particular ideological orientations, etc. Can you address that through legal means? Or what agency has a responsibility for that? Things to think through. And as I said, education is explored as a platform. We had some recommendations. Some of them government have adopted, but particularly in terms of looking at foreign financing of mosques or foundations of schools. We have to address the school as a platform. But also there are lots of different other financial risks that we need to look at. Lots of money in this sphere. Lots of state money is being paid out to different foundations. And we have not had adequate control of some of those funding projects. And then, of course, as always, there is a battle between different agencies. Who has the mandate? Horizontal integration of different agencies responsible for this, but also how do you push down the expertise on the local level in terms of prevention? And I think one of the great challenges for Sweden is to address the whole issue of prevention of violent extremism. So that was a very pessimistic view I painted of the Salafi jihadi environment. Security services is very active on this front, have mapped out all these different environments. But now we're going to go into some of the more softer dimensions in relation to Muslim Brotherhood. And I'll hand over the floor to Aye Kolbom, who will talk a little bit about the Muslim Brotherhood, its activities in Sweden, and how it functions there. So I'll do the transition seamlessly. So thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation to say a few words here about the Muslim Brotherhood, more specifically about their political strategies for Sweden and Europe, I would like to say. It's good for you to know, I think, that I have been studying Ikhwan al-Muslimun, as they're called in Arabic, from a social scientific point of view. I'm not really a security researcher, but I'm learning about the security discourse, or what we shall call it. In Sweden, Islamism as a security problem, the main focus has been on Salafi jihadism, as Magnus said here. I've been working together with Eli for a year or so now with a project financed by the Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency, where we broaden the perspective to also include ideologically radical non-violent Islamists, such as the Muslim Brotherhood, Hizb ut-Tahrir, a small group but interesting group. And this project, this is what we know so far. In Europe, the main umbrella organization for MB, Muslim Brotherhood, is Federation of Islamic Organizations in Europe. And you see the sketch to your right. It was made in June this year when I interviewed Kamal Helbawi, a long-term Muslim brother. He has left the movement because he thinks it's too political. He wants revolution from the ground instead, by dawah. That's his mission. But when I asked him how is the Brotherhood organized in Europe, he made this sketch in my notebook. So, and it corresponds to what we know from before. You see here, I'm not sure if this pointer works, but this umbrella organization has been active in establishing various European level organizations. Up in the right corner, you see European Council for Fatwa and Research, and they work with, it was established by Yusuf al-Qaradawi in 1997, I think. They work with general fatwas. They have all European Muslims as their target or main audience. So they don't work with fatwas case by case, but general answers to how Muslims should live in Europe. You have the European Institute for Human Science in France, and I think they have been active in Wales as well, and they educate imams for Europe. Federation of European Muslim Youth Organization, FEMYSO, is an all-European youth organization working, lobbying the European Parliament, as the Federation also does. They work mainly in the Parliament. And they coordinate work for the 28 member organizations in this, ideological network. This is how FIOE is organized. And according to the man you saw, Kamal Helbawi, if you are part of the General Assembly Shura Council, you have to be a member of Muslim Brotherhood. You cannot lead unless you are a member. You can be active in various activities here without being a member. You can be a sympathizer of the MB school of thought or so. We don't know much about exactly how this is going on, but this is how it's seen to be organized. The strategy has been, as Lorenzo knows, he has written a lot about MB in Europe. they want to be recognized as the main voice of Islam in Europe. They want political influence inside the system. More radical. They are radical in a sense, but they are also flexible. MB is known for its pragmatism, flexibility. Hassan al-Banna, the founder, he said from the beginning that since our goal is to Islamize the whole world, we need a flexible identity so we can be active anywhere, in any context. That makes MB different from Hizb ut-Tahrir and Salafists. They want to isolate themselves from the system. They fear pollution. But MB is a lot more. They want both, you can say that. And they work with dialogue. It's a very popular term in Sweden. You should have a dialogue with different groups. But in MB terminology, this is a question of dawah, that missionary work. So it's all MB affiliated organizations, if you look at what they say in their public documents, they work with the preservation and development of Muslim religious identity. They fear deep westernization, meaning they can work, they can have a job, but their emotional and intellectual life should be governed by Sharia, the Quran, and the examples from Muhammad. And in order to succeed with this project, to influence Muslims, they need a parallel Islamic society. Yusuf al-Qaradawi calls it Muslim ghetto. In Sweden, these groups talk a lot about the Muslim civil society, as if this is an existing social formation, which it's not. But it says something about how they view society. They work with a victim narrative. Elliott will say more about that. Where they tactically use the discourse of Islamophobia, we all know the term Islamophobia, to manipulate and shame society in different ways. And they also socialize Muslims in the general victimhood thinking, something which easily becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They also propagate that all and other Muslims are victims for misconceptions, misunderstanding. They are victims of almost anything and everything. That's their position. Implications, ideological ambitions that would break up social cohesion by building a Muslim nation, enclave, parallel society. They want to unite all Muslims in kind of ummah. They attach strong values to the concept of jihad, even though they emphasize the inner struggling for being a good Muslim, but they have the concept in their thinking. So it's there is a potential in this group for violence, and their goal is to influence European Muslim citizens to follow a parallel legal system, Sharia. That's their. So they have different objectives and they work in the long run. So it's really more of a long-term problem compared to, for example, Salafism. Okay. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ryan. Eli?
We now turn to Elliott, who's going to sort of unite the two, talk a little bit about the victimhood and the ideology, some ideological strands. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here. I feel tremendously privileged and honored to be able to talk to you here with such distinguished scholars as Malmö and Lorenzo, being able to do this work together with the Civil Contingency Agency of Sweden. Anyway, my angle into this is, my perspective into this is science of religion. I'm dealing with science of religion with focus on Islam and the Middle East. There is no doubt, or everybody probably understands and knows by now, that a religious person could be anything. Could be a good-hearted, nice, warm, responsible person. But being religious doesn't mean that you're good. And the religious narrative or narratives or religion can be used in different ways depending on interest. And what I'm talking about here is the narrative of victimhood. The narrative of victimhood in political Islam, talking about the Muslim Brotherhood or any other idea of political Islam, is victimhood very, very central. What is interesting, though, is how that victimhood is transferred from the Middle East into Europe. What I will try to explain in the short time I have here, it's more developed in the books I've written previously, is how the narrative of victimhood is moved from the Middle East, got a twist and switch, and found its associates in European politics. Because the question that we always need to ask ourselves, how come that these organizations that he's talking about, the movements that Magnus Ransdorff talked about, how come that they were able to establish themselves so good with fundings, with building schools and so on and so forth in the European context? First of all, to build a religious narrative, which these organizations are based on, you need to have religious sources. So anyone you talk to, any religious person, whatever is done, whether you're good or bad or wherever you decide to help people or kill people, it's always in the sources. Everything is written. Everything is said, everything is written. You always go back to the sources. So the legitimacy is based on that you can follow up on the sources and say, I have a source for it and this is why I do it. The second one that's important is the religious vocabulary. There is a religious vocabulary that would be used, for instance, for the Brotherhood movement. You can take a term like jihadist, for instance, which is a term used by Salafist very often, which actually refers to the time before Muhammad and the pre-Islamic area, which would be some sort of unenlightened. And when Muhammad comes and the world is revealed to Islam, then they are enlightened. Cook takes that vocabulary and moves it into our modern world and society and actually said that everyone that believes what I believe is enlightened and the others are not. So the religious vocabulary is used and adjusted into everyday life, transferred into new story. And it's very important that the movement has a legitimacy by religious authorities. Now, when it comes to Islam, especially Sunni Islam, it's not Catholic Church. It's not like you have a pope, he says, it's done. It's a flat organization. It's very similar to what you would have in the evangelic churches in Christianity. The pastor is a pastor, he gets his legitimacy through the people that follows him. There is no hierarchy going up or down, but you need at least to have one religious authority that will say, this guy is right. You can't just come up. You say you're imam, that's fine, you make your ideas relevant. Comes to Said Qutb, for instance, which is one of the biggest ideologies of the Muslim Brotherhood, basically seen not as a big scholar. But he had his followers and he got the religious legitimacy. Finally, the religious narrative creates meaning,
and that's very important. It creates meaning and it expresses moral supremacy. Every religious narrative has moral supremacy and it creates meaning. Everyone. Doesn't really mean, doesn't matter what the message is. For the group that is in it, it creates moral supremacy. That's good, but it's also a problem. Because the presumption of the narrative of religious victimhood is that you have to have a victim. If you have a victim, if I'm a victim, you have a perpetrator, and you need justice. So the victim is the one standing or comes with the idea for the justice, what should be just. In this case, if we implement Islam in the whole world or wherever, then the society will be just. Won't be unjust, it will be just. But moral supremacy also means that the others, in most of the cases, are inferior. And here starts the problem. Because you can't be more moral than somebody else if the somebody else is not inferior. So these groups that is twisting the religion into a political or a militant ideology also is giving itself the idea to look down on the others and playing a moral supremacy that becomes very problematic in most of the cases that both I and Magnus Ransdorff have pointed out. Now, where did it start? Why and how? It's a big question. We don't have the whole time, and I'm probably already out of time. But anyway, many scholars start the political Islam, the Salafi jihadist movement, with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Because the collapse of the Ottoman Empire gave the Muslim world an idea that something didn't work. It didn't work. Something had to be done. But it didn't work not because that Islam is wrong, because Islam can't be wrong, because it's given by God. It has to be wrong because of something else. So here we have the perpetrators and the enemy that created this problem, that created a situation that actually destroyed the Ottoman Empire, were of course West, Jews, and Christians. They were the ones that were infiltrating Islam, damaging it, and creating the problem that finally made the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. So the victims, again, are actually three different groups. We can say that the victims are, or from the victimhood narrative comes Salafism, Muslim Brotherhood, Ikhwan, but also another political branch that is important for the Middle East, and that is the Ba'ath, the Arabic socialistic movement. That said, forget about Islam, forget about everything. We have to go back to our real sources. The pharaohs, Nebuchadnezzar. That will make us powerful. Now, for Islam, of course, then, the victims, justice is Islam. If we go back and we implement pure Islam in society, pure Islam, then we will be successful again. And for the Ba'ath, it was a matter of socialist pre-Arabism. These two didn't get very well along, as you know. The Ba'ath party, socialist parties they created dictatorships, and they were persecuting Muslim organizations and religious Muslims and so on in most of the countries, Syria, Egypt, and so on. The result of this is that we got in the Middle East, the perpetrators were the socialist, secularist dictators. The MB moral narrative, because the Muslim Brotherhood comes out of this 1926 or 1929, depending on what date you want to put. Their moral narrative is the narrative of victimhood and justice turned towards the oppressed. And who are the oppressed? They are poor and oppressed people that also are the resources and the victims. Resources in the meaning that they are the ones that are going to vote for these Muslim Brotherhood to gain power. And victims as a part of the narrative. Now, in Europe, things is different. Muslims come to Europe, there is no dictator. He's gone. The main problem is gone. There is no, of course, there is no corruption, there is no, it's transparent, you have governments that work, the police doesn't beat up anyone, anywhere, anytime. But in Europe, there's battle against racism became very crucial during the 60s and 70s. Communication. As Kenan Malik writes in his book From Fatwa to Jihad, the political idea changed to be something, it went from equal rights to special rights. The whole idea in countries like Sweden, England, and so on, we're talking about equal rights, everybody got equal rights, doesn't matter, you're black, brown, Muslim, Jew, whatever, equal rights. You need medical help, get medical help. We don't look at religion, we don't look at skin color. But suddenly, to get rid of racism or any problem that was considered to be in those countries that also had a colonial bad conscience, it moved over to rights depending on religion and ethnicity. Politics of identity. And that also created a new situation when it comes to fundings. Relocating resources from those who needed, I need because I'm sick, to the ethnic and religious groups. I need because I'm a Muslim, or because I'm this, or because I'm that. So we have state fundings in Sweden that is funding one group after the other with enormous sums of money. Europe also needed at that time a new class of unprivileged people. At least the labor parties or the socialist parties needed a new movement of unprivileged people. The Berlin Wall not long ago, socialism lost its momentum. So here, suddenly, and for good reasons, the Muslim population in European countries was seen as the unprivileged group that had to be taken care of. So, the switch or the twist of the moral narrative of victimhood changed. Right? There is no dictator anymore, but still, the perpetrator is a racist, Islamophobic, and post-colonial Europe. The new problem, still the same victims, but the new perpetrator. The resources for the issue is EU politics and fundings. The money. Everybody's handing out money. There's no problem to get the money. There's no problem to establish yourself with the help of money because of the politics of ethnicity and religion or identity politics. And the victims are still seen as Muslim. That's a very strong message. And this connection between the stories is actually what allowed these organizations, this group, to establish themselves. And not only that, stopped every reasonable research on these issues from scholars that started to address it. Because when scholars started to address and say, hey, we have a problem, it was immediately stopped with the argument of Islamophobia. And I will stop there with finally the statement of Olivier Roy, how, as I said in the beginning, you can do just about anything with religion if you want. And here is the quote from Olivier Roy, where he says, this is the part of the success of this organization, where he writes in his book, The Favor of Political Islam, they received their political education not in religious schools, but in college and university campus, where they rubbed shoulders with militant Marxists, concepts they often borrowed and injected with chronic criminology. That was to make a long story short. Did I go too far?
You're fine.
I'm fine. Okay, if I'm done, I'm fine. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have an applause for this, all three of you? Before we open it to questions, I will abuse my my position of moderator and ask my own question to all three of you. I think you outlined, all three of you, the situation of different Islamist groups operating in Sweden. I think if you look at it, the spectrum from the violent jihadists to the Salafists to the non-violent ones like Muslim Brotherhood, to those who participate in society like Brotherhood, going back on the spectrum to those that are rejected and used violence. This is a challenge that all European and all Western countries, in the United States as well, faces, all these different groups. Some people, and I know that we've had these conversations, would argue that Sweden, to some degree, constitutes a particularly favorable environment for these groups to operate in. Dynamics are not unique to Sweden, maybe some of them are, but they're accentuated in Sweden. They're more intense than in other countries. So the question to you is if you can, for the audience, sort of outline why you think Sweden constitutes, whether it's the violent ones, whether it's the Salafists, whether it's the Brotherhood, a particularly fertile environment in which to operate. And the second part would be whether you've seen over the last few years, it's partially through your work as well, a change in attitude of the Swedish government, state, and in general the public debate, which I think in Sweden is also have been to some degree probably not as open as in other European countries, and acknowledging the phenomenon. So just contextualizing this dynamics of Islamism to the Swedish environment.
Okay, so let me start by just saying that the reason why we focus on these two dimensions is that one is of course a major security concern. And when it comes to the Salafists, they have of course been built up in neighboring countries also throughout the 1990s. I mentioned Mohammed Momo, he was in the 1990s. He was the Islamic State of Iraq's commander in Mosul. So there were key figures who established themselves in Sweden. You have Mullah Krekar in Norway, you had Said Mansour in Denmark, and they were the lighthouses that attracted individuals. But they are not vacuum packed, they are transnational groups with different ethnic and religious authority and backgrounds. And that has sort of developed over time, and it's happening all over Europe, but in different velocities and different speeds and different pressures from the government, etc. So that's one set of problems. The issue with them is that they're not so visible. They want to retreat from society. They want to insulate their sort of communities. And they're not large. They are, they're not very big communities. The other communities that I and Elliott are talking about is really individuals associated with Muslim Brotherhood direction, and what they do is in essence they get, I would say, 90% of government funding inadvertently, crowding out other orientations, because it's a mosaic of different dimensions. They have the largest sort of mosques, they have the largest resources, and I'm arguing that it's very useful to have a pluralistic, a whole mosaic of orientations that they can have dialogue, compete with each other, etc. It's not a good thing to put all your eggs in one basket, to try to, should we say, to create a cocoon within their environment. And they thrive on the issue of victimhood. It is not one of cooperation with majority society, etc. They use Islamophobia, which is a legitimate concern. Don't get me wrong. But they thrive on that as a battering rod to mobilize their own constituency in their own community. I think it's very important to understand and realize that when dealing with some of those issues. And maybe in Sweden it has gone to the extreme in the sense that you have those dimensions that you have. I mean, when I go out to some of these, should we say, socially vulnerable suburbs, there is no discussions that it's not Ikhwani orientated mosques or environments that are linked to the Muslim Brotherhood. Equally, in Gothenburg, one of the largest mosques is a Salafi, within the Salafi jihadi orientation that exists there. The problem is that some of the smaller ones, or some of the other orientations, don't have enough space, they don't have the resources, they're not very well organized, and some may even be dependent on some of the larger groups that have and provide the money. So in that sense, it is the two dominant actors is really the Muslim Brotherhood on one hand and the Salafi orientated groups on the other hand that are least visible.
I think that do you hear me without the mic? You do, right? Okay.
It might be because we're broadcasting. So.
Okay. I think it's three major reasons why Sweden has been so vulnerable for these movements. First of all the funding. Sweden is a country with great option for fundings. Everything is funded by the government. And together with that, the government is looking for representatives. This is a crucial combination. You want to have representative. Take me to your leader. Now, the leader in this case, as far as concerned the Labour Party in Sweden, they didn't want, conservative Sufis with beard and a strange hat and a skirt or whatever it was. They wanted like a modern Muslim. They found a modern Muslim, and that was the Ikhwan organization, the Muslim Brotherhood representatives, because they are the modern Muslims. And in that, at least the Labour Party in Sweden thought that they would find the Muslim sister organization. Social Democrats were sitting with Said Qutb's book, Social Justice in Islam, quoting it, saying, here we have our Muslim from a political point of view, our Muslim sisters and brothers. Now, this also created a homogenization, like one voice of Islam came out. They got full control. As Lorenzo Vidino is talking about gatekeepers, Sweden was the perfect society for the gatekeeping status. The politicians got the representatives, which actually saying more of what politicians thought that Muslims are, and the Muslim society got the guy that says, I know all the politicians, you can talk to me. Now, this created a situation where other voices, as Magnus Ranstorp was saying, didn't come through. I put together last year an anthology that's called Muslims in Sweden. 17 voices, Muslims in Sweden, the first one made in Europe, something like that. They could write whatever they wanted. They were totally free. But they had to talk about, one, their Swedish identity, Muslim identity, because they consider themselves as Muslims on one side, and they are Swedish citizens. So all of them are tied up to here with the organizations. And by doing that book, I was called the cultural racist, of course. The only question was why they didn't have done the organizations a book like that 20 years ago. So Sweden was the perfect environment for something that was totally new for the Swedish politicians, and the Swedish politicians thought that they could use their way. And with the fundings, it all got together.
Could I just add one thing? In around 2010, you had also, should we say, activists, completely legitimate democratic activism of those that wanted to represent particular groups. And they aggressively pursued also post-colonial identity politics. And you can see how that fits into the sort of the narrative, the meta-narrative of victimhood justice that Elliott is talking about. And therefore, that's used to mobilize communities, but it's completely democratic. But if you don't know about how it is, the mechanisms of that, of course politicians don't want to touch the issue. They become very much on the defensive of the issue. And adding to the issue, we have huge problems with right-wing extremism, legitimate concerns with extremism, with fear of and Islamophobia. So how do you discuss this issue in a reasonable, factually based way? So it also leads to polarization in the public discourse. So even touching some of these issues is extremely sensitive in a consensus-oriented society like Sweden.
I think that you can summarize an answer to Lorenzo's question with Sweden has offered Islamists a very good political opportunity structure. And the country, meaning politicians, have built this from 1975 when Sweden, like many other countries in Europe, introduced multiculturalism as an administrative framework for how to deal with immigration and minority groups. So it's built into the system that, as Eli said here, we need representatives. and we need Muslim representatives because we want to have a dialogue with Muslims, we want to understand Islam, etc., etc. So this is under debate now, but Sweden has constructed this problem by itself the last 40 to 50 years, I would like to say. So Islamists in Sweden are active in a very, in a good context, and they have learned how to, profit from all these ideological and economic structures that build this context. That's my
Perfect. Thank you. I think we can open to questions. You can just briefly introduce yourself and ask.
Yes, my name is Bill Dane. I'm with a consulting firm, but not really here for that reason today. It's my interest in Sweden. I worked for 14 years at NATO on civil emergency preparedness, and Sweden, Norway, Netherlands, the U.S., I would say, were for decades the countries most interested in preparedness. So I got to see the trend line that was developing over time as we came to our quarterly meetings. And it was very interesting. And also, I've been watching, there's a TV channel here called Megahertz that broadcasts international murder mysteries for the past 30 years. And at least a half dozen of those were Swedish programs. I'm getting to a point, so don't get anxious. And so half the people here weren't even alive when I started watching these programs, Wallander and 5 or others. Okay, so you have just verified everything that your writers saw, that the Muslims arrived and you patted them on the head yourselves as victims. You identified them as victims. You gave them everything. And then I remember one episode was either crime on the Muslims by Swedes who were already, against them, or crime on crime within the community itself. And then it took a turn when there was crime on crime when a Muslim removed the face of someone else they killed. And then you got the sense that this is maybe not quite what it looks like. And my personal interest is my sister-in-law married a Swedish man 8 years ago. They live outside of Uppsala, and we take the road from their place up to Uppsala. And we know you have lots of circles, and the first circle you make a right. You have the most fantastic recycling center where people help you, and then George said, well, you don't take the second right because this goes over to the Islamic community. So you've answered a lot of the questions I had, but I still don't understand where the government is on the isolation of these cells of Muslims. I don't know what, I would love an answer on whatever the Salafist community is, but, Sharia law, is Sweden practicing what France is? That it's no-go in these neighborhoods? You don't police with Swedish police? I was shocked 3 years ago when a woman and her daughter were beheaded.
Sorry, I gotta
Okay, so my question is, so we don't get the coverage of Sweden and what's going on, so I greatly appreciate you all being here. I would like your comments on how you're handling the communities themselves and what your participation is.
I'm going to be very brief in a sense. I mean, I think the whole notion of no-go areas and so on it doesn't exist. The police goes everywhere. It's difficult for them sometimes. I've been out myself in the most difficult areas, but they do their best, and so there is a presence there. Of course, the big issue is about trust between citizens and authorities, between citizens and government agencies. And I think the great challenge is how do you break segregation? How do you make meaningful connections in civil society between different groups? And I'm not speaking about Muslims, non-Muslims. I'm I'm speaking here about different groups. We have a mosaic. I mean, I think we have United Nations of communities that exist. And we were speaking here earlier today about what a great civil society engagement you have here in the United States and in Canada. I mean, we're envious of the way in which you get along. Everyone is fantastically polite. We're speaking about that almost every day, saying that, look, something is working really here in the United States. And it will work as well in Sweden, but it's just finding those meeting points, finding those connections. Yes, Islam, certain orientations, and I'm speaking here only about the Salafis. Yes, there are problems, but there are relatively small problems. When it comes to these other groups, it is just about being aware of the narratives to break, should we say, the different issues of getting the right kind of dialogue and knowing the playing field in relation to the narrative of victimhood, etc. I'm more interested in some of these groups, and when it comes to funding, of having transparency, but also that you can have transparency in terms of funding, but also that you can have plurality of different voices. It's not a matter of whether Islam should be or should not be. We are a mosaic of a society, and we have to create those sort of conditions. But we are struggling because there are a lot of different parameters that are occurring. So we have parameters in structural terms, psychosocial terms, and perhaps probably we will hear about some of the other structures like normative structures like gangs and others. That's a different set of issues. It doesn't have anything to do particularly with religion.
I think it's a dangerous way to go to. I mean, we're talking about Islam here, and that's the issue because it's the Muslim Brotherhood. But if you want to go into Sweden and talk about isolated areas and so on, Christian groups from the Middle East are experts on isolating themselves, dealing with honor killings. Their crimes are maybe a little bit sophisticated. They're robbing the whole welfare straight up on your face. It's not that the Muslim group is big, and there is a trigger, as I said before, where the Muslim existence in Europe trigger the Christian identity, because we have two religions that are missionating, and both of them are claiming moral supremacy. And if you do that, of course, the Muslims are pulled down, they're not the Christians. But when it comes to crime and so on, it's not.
We talk about now also about the rise of right-wing dimensions as well, and that's primarily fueled of individuals on social media. Don't know very much about Islam. They can maybe make a distinction between Shia and Sunni, but they don't have any other orientations, and therefore it becomes self-reinforcing on social media that is occurring, and that's occurring at an alarming rate in Europe. And therefore we speak also about the rise of the far right, which I think has the same conditions now today, which is transnational, as we saw when the rise of ISIS. And we have to really deal with that, and it's becoming really difficult to talk about this issue because you have to unpack it at so many different levels.
I very briefly don't want to get more questions.
You also have, when it comes to the segregated areas in Sweden, you have white flight. So when immigrants move in, native Swedes move out. So there seems to be a double process. Swedes are moving out while religious Muslims, I have interviewed several of those. I lived in one of those areas. They move in. So that is the process. I don't know if it's stoppable or so, but it's an ongoing grassroots process.
Thanks, Lorenzo. Irfan Saeed from the State Department, and it's great to see you again. Thank you to each of you for your presentations. Just a quick question from Magnus. I'm glad you mentioned Al-Hol. You have a lot of these women and children from across Europe. in these IDP camps and some of the detention facilities. So I wanted to get your take and Sweden's take on repatriation of those in detention facilities and those in IDP camps. If so, if Sweden is amenable to repatriation, what happens to them when they go back to Sweden? If not, why not?
All right, so I think all of the governments in Europe are in a holding pattern. The flights are up, it's circling. No one is lynching. No one wants to be the first. We have 21 women, 20 are widows, and we have 57 kids. That's not a problem to take care of. It's a political question. And when it comes to the men, there are about 10, 15 men that are in detention camps. Most of them, of course, are the women are all in our home, but it's not a huge number. And so, but it is a political question. And Sweden has been pretty late when it comes to laws in terrorism legislation. So if they come back, they will be met. First of all, they will probably meet the consulate because they don't have the travel documentation. So they will be flagged. They will not get into Schengen because of Schengen information system without them being flagged. Security service will meet them, have a voluntary talk, about you, etc. And then, of course, the police may start investigation. But it is, of course, very difficult for those who have been in detention camps or in a hall because they don't have any electronic gear with them. It's difficult to get, and it may take some time in terms of war crimes investigation. But it's not a big issue. It's more of a big issue for some of the other countries. Why it's a political dynamite is because the public is outraged that there has been no justice for the atrocities. So in effect, for a long time you can go from, because we didn't have the laws, we didn't have, you can go from Raqqa, you could have committed all sorts of atrocities, back to your apartment in Gothenburg. No repercussion.
We have a hard stop at 11:15, so let me get 3 questions and we answer all together. Let's say 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Very quickly. Thank you.
Hello, I'm John Wing from Centra Technology Incorporated. So Magnus, early on you had mentioned how over a relatively short period of time from 2010 to 2017, the number of extremists of all types quickly increased in Sweden. Just wondering, over the next few years, do you think the number of extremists, like violent extremists, is going to continue to increase? And what might it take for that number to stop going up or reverse?
Second. Yep.
You mentioned Russian support for the Nordic resistance movement and other far-right extremist organizations in Sweden. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that point a little bit. And also, I was wondering if you had any data on Swedes who have gone to fight for paramilitary organizations in the Donbass region. Also, I'm John Stafford, Department of Homeland Security Accounting for Influence Task Force.
I'm Lisa Buckner, Irish Embassy. This question is also for Magnus. You mentioned that prison in Sweden is not a source of radicalization.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you could speak on the prison management policies that you have in place that you think set Sweden apart from other countries in that regard.
Thank you. Last question. Yeah.
Hi, this is Jen from the department. My question is related to the fact that you mentioned how 34% now, the differentiation between first generation and second and third generation. I wanted to hear your take on why that might be, why more first generation have been involved in being foreign fighters rather than the second and third generations in other countries.
All right, I'm so sorry. Don't be let them say something. The first one was on, just remind me, on extreme, is it getting worse?
Yeah, the number of extremists.
Well, this is why the security service is taking action against particular individuals who are foreign nationals to try to expel them. I think there's a huge human rights dimension here, which means they probably will stay in the country. The other issue we're facing is also, we had a huge wave of immigrants coming in 2015, 163,000, about half of them get to stay. Now, there's a great difficulty, or some of them go underground because they don't want to leave the country. And they stay underground, and they may stay for 4 years, and then they can renew their application. So I think we have to sort of deal with also this underground dimension of individuals who have no right to stay, who go also underground. And that number will increase. And we don't have the capacity to expel them in enough numbers, and we don't have detention facilities. We have 550 places for the border police, and that's not a lot. You saw Akilov, he was one of 12,500 being sought out by the police. Second issue, NMR, Nordic Resistance Movement in Russia, or whether there are other ones in Donbass, Ukraine. Yes, we have had Swedes who have been quite open about fighting in the Azov battalion. We have to be concerned about those individuals as well. Also looking into whether they've committed war crimes. We also have people who have gone down to fight against ISIS, and they have not been prosecuted. In Denmark, they have been prosecuted as well. So they have cases of individuals being prosecuted. When it comes to prison management, there are about 80 individuals in prison right now who are Salafi jihadists. We have a prison management system that addresses other crimogenic factors. We have very good intelligence system in the prisons as well in terms of the management. Also very small units, which is making them. It's not a good environment if you want to be an extremist. We also separate them. So that they cannot sort of, like in France, become an incubator. And lastly, the issue about 34% are Swedish citizens. It's not just about. 34% were born in Sweden. They came into Sweden and they spent an average of 7-8 years before they left again to some conflict zone. So within those 7, so around the age of 12, 13, 14, which is also a very vulnerable time when you immigrate to another country in terms of your identity. It's even worse in Norway, where only 18% of those who left were born in Sweden. So there's something going on in the Nordics. And the Norwegian Security Service said themselves, perhaps we need to explore this. We're not very good at integration. We're not, there may be that dimension in there as well.
When it comes to, just to add on the last one, if you read, for instance, Olivier Roy's last book on jihadism, he talks about the first generation as like a middle generation, the generation that is hanging in between culture. They're stuck in between. He calls them deculturified or something like that. Without culture, they're denying the parents' culture. They don't want to be a part of it. They don't like it. They want to be part of the modern society, but the modern society not always let them in. Or they don't have the skills, or they don't have the language, or they don't know whatever it might be. His projection, I don't think there's enough research on it yet, but his projection is that the third generation will be better off. But this first generation that find itself stuck in the middle somehow is very vulnerable, and that is also the reason why they are more than others, according to him.
It also may be useful for you to go back and refer to Inglehart's World Value Survey, where you will look at the issue of religiosity, collectivism, and individualism. And you'll see that the Nordic countries will be extreme compared to the rest of the world, who are collectivistic, who are religious, etc. So we have a lot of clashes between secular, individual values, group religious values, and Sweden is trying its best to try to navigate those different dimensions. And of course, the jury is still out how we will do for the future. We are not a very good tourism advertisement for Sweden. I apologize for that. But it is a fantastic country. This is a small segment that get all the headlines. So I hope to see you soon back in Scandinavia.
With this, before asking you to join me to thank the speakers, I just want to remind all of you we have another very important event tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, the ISIS Files with Rukmini Kalimachi from the New York Times. So if you can RSVP for that, we will be more than happy to see you again tomorrow. I hope you can join in thanking Magnus, Eli, and Aye for the presentation. It was very, very informative, and we hope to see you again soon with probably a better picture of Sweden, a more optimistic one. That'd be great. Thank you very much.